Good evening and welcome to tonight's HDB webinar, A Journey of New Zealand Farming. It's 22nd of November. My name is Richard Meredith. I am a Knowledge Exchange Manager at HDB Cereals and Oilseeds. I cover the West of England and Wales. Before we start tonight's webinar, I'm just gonna run through the housekeeping points with you. You're all muted, so we can't hear you. There's a questions box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you'd like to ask any questions as we go through tonight's webinar, please feel free to do so. We will also be having a questions period at the end if you want to save any for then. We're aiming to conclude around 8 o'clock, give or take, with how many questions we have, so we should be wrapped up by then. The recording of the webinar will be going onto the HDB YouTube site in the next couple of days. I'm just going to hand over to our speakers tonight now, and they're going to introduce themselves. We're very lucky to have two esteemed speakers, Nick Pyke from New Zealand and Martin Williams from Herefordshire. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of tonight's webinar, gentlemen, I was going to ask Nick, firstly, if you could just explain who you are, where you're from, and how you got here tonight.
Right. Well, I'm Nick Pyke. I'm from New Zealand, as Richard said, and up until recently, I've been involved with running the FAR, which is Foundation for Arable Research. It's roughly the equivalent of AHDB Cereals and Oilseeds, and so we're the research and extension organisation for the arable farmers in New Zealand. Our system's a little bit different in that the farmers vote every 6 years as to whether we exist, and we went through a vote last year, which we were very successful in, but I felt that it was time after 20 years of being involved that someone else took over. So I have stood aside and gone through a transition with a new person, and now I'm creating my own business around helping farmers and businesses innovate.
Thank you, Nick. Martin, over to you.
Hello, everybody. I'm Martin. I'm the fatter of the Chuckle brothers of the AHDB Monitor Farmers. I'm from Herefordshire, and I'm the token farmer here today in this shoebox where two blokes are having a chat about farming. Unfortunately, we've got no beer, so we're on coffee and water. But yeah, hi Nick, nice to meet you. I've seen Nick a couple of times this week. We seem to have strayed off the topic of farming quite a lot, but tonight we've been told we have to stick to it. So, Nick, firstly, how does the government structure in New Zealand differ from the UK with a sort of means towards agriculture?
Yes, well, New Zealand, we have a government at the moment, which is a coalition of the Greens and the Labour government. And so we're expecting some changes in the next 2 or 3 years in relation to that, as the Green coalition part of it is putting more emphasis on the environment, and we also have a Minister of Agriculture who's not quite as high in cabinet as the previous ones have been, which will put some challenges with regard to where agriculture fits in the political system.
We're really lucky at the moment. We've got a very high profile minister who's knocking on the door of number 10 all the time, and so from a British farmer's point of view, we're in a fairly good space with him because he's listened to. Is your guy listened to, or is he not really very prominent in the world?
The current minister is very knowledgeable about agriculture. He is listened to within cabinet. He's probably not as high profile as what we'd like him to be, and certainly he's not as high profile as the ministers of agriculture were through the times when we had significant changes around the subsidies.
But he's got agricultural background, hasn't he?
Oh yes, he's got a very good agricultural background. He's got a very good understanding of what we need to do in agriculture, and he's got a good team around him and is doing a good job of trying to develop a great future focused plan for agriculture.
And what's the mood in New Zealand? Are farmers happy?
Generally, I think farmers are pretty happy at the moment. Obviously, what happens price-wise influences their thinking. So at the moment, the dairy prices have slipped a bit. The lamb or meat prices look okay, and Arable's sort of there or thereabouts. So it's at the moment I guess they're as happy as they always are. We've got a range of farmers, so there's the grumpy ones and the happy ones, and some of them are happy no matter what.
Yeah, we've got plenty of grumpy ones. We can match you with those. So I'll let you guide us through what we're doing.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is give you a little bit of an overview of the New Zealand arable farming system, which is where I have the greatest knowledge, obviously, of having worked in that for the last 20 or so years. And we're going to start off just giving you a bit of an overview, and then we'll move on and talk about some of the issues that are facing farming, and also touch on a bit of a perspective about where things may be going in the future. So I'll initially, touching on the slide that you have in front of you, that most of the industries around domestic production and domestic use, and a large component of that's pasture seed for our pastoral industry, but we also have a range of cereals used in both food and feed. We don't grow enough grains to fulfill the New Zealand market, so we import grains largely from Australia for both milling and for feed, and we also produce a range of silages. So exports are part of what we do. They're not as large as we'd like them to be, obviously, and mostly around seeds. So both Hereford seeds, which is at 54 million pounds roughly, and vegetable seeds, a similar sort of number. And our vegetable seed production is around both hybrid and open pollinated species. So we're often number one in the world for hybrid carrot production, and often number one in the world for radish production as well. We also have a few other grain-based products and cereal multiplications.
You were saying earlier that you produce enough carrots for everyone in the UK to eat 6 each, is that right?
Well, not quite 6 each, Martin. 1.6 carrots per day. Now, there's a few provisos around that. That's every seed that we harvest and has been cleaned would have to germinate into a carrot which somebody ate, and then if we'd be able to feed 1.6 carrots to every person in the UK every day of the year.
Even if they didn't want them?
Well, yeah, obviously they wouldn't want them after that.
So you go back to your grain, your cereals, you're a net importer of cereals then, really. And where does that come from?
Yes, we are a net importer of cereals. A large chunk of it comes from our close neighbour across the ditch, Australia, and we would like to change that. We'd like to, particularly with regard to milling wheat, so that we're producing high quality milling wheat in New Zealand to feed bread to New Zealanders.
And where do you see New Zealand's potential going forward? Is it export, or do you need to feed at home more than export?
I would like to think that we'd be self-sufficient in feeding at home with regard to grains. Down the track, maybe we'll export some high quality grains, potentially some Durham wheats, some purple wheats, things like that, that have a little bit more value than, or a little bit more interest than some of the more commodity type wheats.
Yeah. Are you growing the same varieties that we grow?
We do largely grow the same varieties. In the feed areas, in milling we have our own varieties, but in feed areas we work with UK and European genetics. Not all of the varieties behave exactly the same way they do here, but many of them are the same, and we have similar sorts of problems with some of them, and breakdown of resistance and so on and so forth.
Yeah. You're not growing any old-fashioned ones. I always imagine people that go to New Zealand say that it's like living in the 50s. So beautiful sort of a country that is sort of a nice idyllic picture.
Yeah.
But it's quite forward thinking when it comes to agriculture.
Well, I'd like to think we're forward thinking. I can't think of any 50s wheats that we're still growing. There possibly is, but I don't know the farmers growing them either.
Yeah, just for home brew maybe.
Yeah. So we're not a very big nation when it comes to cropping. You can see the areas there of wheat, only 48,000 hectares compared to 1.8 million here in the UK, and similar sort of numbers for barley and maize. Our maize area is not that great either. Our largest crop by far is the forage brassicas at 350,000 hectares, and that's obviously all fed in situ to animals, and is on a range of farms, both cropping and livestock farms. We also, although we're not very large in area, we try and make up for it in producing high yields, and again the yields are average for the country for the last, I think that's 2017 figures, so 9.6 tonnes per hectare for wheat. Not as high as we'd like for barley, and hopefully we'll gradually increase those yields over time a bit.
Has cropping changed since the subsidy in New Zealand has disappeared?
Yes, it has markedly changed. We've seen a shift to the production of more seeds, higher value seeds, and so the vegetable seed industry has largely grown from post-subsidies, and that's viewed by many farmers as an integral part of what they're doing. It might be a very small part of what they grow, but it's a pretty important part.
And you've got more specialised farms now than there were? Are there less mixed farms and more specialisms?
Most of our cropping farms are still mixed at some level, so they'll have animals on there. I think there's only a couple I can think of that don't have animals on at any time of the year, but they tend to specialise more, so they'll consider cropping as a major part of their business or livestock as a major part of their business.
Okay, yeah.
So we have some issues that are critical for farming as well, and there's a number of them, and we'll talk a little bit more about these as we go along. Yield and profitability, I think we'll come back to that and cover that in a couple of slides a bit later on. The value chain and identifying consumers who care is something that we're talking a lot about. We're in a commodity market for many of the things we're growing, and how do we get that higher value for our products, and we'll touch on that a bit more down the track. Innovation is something that's critical for any industry going ahead, and we're no different. And whether it's around things such as endophyte, which are synergistic fungi associated with grasses that give unique attributes such as reducing livestock problems, or whether it's precision ag technologies, those sorts of things, again, we have to try and stay ahead of the game. I think we're going to come back to right to farm a bit more in a minute. The farm systems and the diversity of land use is something that I think in New Zealand we're still challenged with. We tend to think of ourselves, as I just said, as predominantly an arable farmer or predominantly a livestock farmer, and we don't look at the land as a whole and say what is it would be the best use of this land. And so potentially seeing more crops on pastoral farms or more animals on arable farms to try and utilise the land for the best purpose that it's there for.
With the use of livestock, are they using it in rotation in using grassland to increase the fertility?
Yes, certainly, and the ideal scenario is to have a herbicide grass seed crop, just like you do here, and that will go in, be grazed during the establishment phase, shut up, taken for seed, the straw or the ryegrass straw fed to animals, and then grazed for another couple of times or right through the winter after harvest.
Same as here, really. Then.
Yeah, and that's really great way of building up the fertility.
Yeah,
and the soil quality.
You mentioned the right to farm. Has anyone got the right to farm in New Zealand? Has everybody got the right to farm?
Anybody can farm if they've got the ability to buy the land or to lease the land. But that's expensive. Land is expensive in New Zealand, maybe not as expensive as what you pay for land here, but it certainly is a major impediment to somebody going into farming.
Yeah, you said earlier it's about £8,000 an acre, is that right?
Yeah, I think that's about what we'd say for irrigated land, so that's with irrigation on it.
Yeah, so that's similar to over here, really. So going back to that then, from a succession point of view, how does it work in New Zealand? Is it as awkward and touchy as it might be over here?
I think there are a lot of issues around succession, the same as what there is here. There are family farms, and there's more than one party in the family, and so there are potential issues around how do you get that succession from one generation to the next, and how do you make sure that's evenly shared across the whole of the family. There's a lot more effort going into helping farmers with succession planning now than what there was 5, 10, 15 years ago, which may be making a difference. I think that where farmers are thinking earlier in their careers about the succession as well as to how they're going to get the transfer from one generation to the next, or to move off the land if that's what they want to do.
And the average age of a farmer would be similar to over here?
I think we're fairly similar to over here. Yes, certainly we're not inundated with a lot of young people in farming, and there are going to be challenges going forward getting labour into farming.
Yeah. Are you losing farms, amalgamating?
yes, there is, farms are amalgamating. It's probably slowed down a little bit in the last few years from what it was, but there tend to be farms being taken over by a larger farm and amalgamated into that.
I've got a question here for you. How much, regarding the cropping area in New Zealand, how much of the forage maize area is grown for AD plants?
That's a very good question, as we don't have any operating AD plants in New Zealand. Zero. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. So all of the maize grown for forages for silage.
Mm-hmm.
It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah, considering.
But we have renewable energy through hydro, so we have plenty of energy through other sources. Well, enough energy at the moment.
Mm.
Yeah.
So we also have to think about things such as climate change, biosecurity, biodiversity. But one of the things which I had thought we were a little bit different from the UK, but having been here for a couple of weeks, is the critical mass. And because we're a small industry, we are concerned about our ability to access agri-chemicals. We do sometimes struggle to get the machinery that we need in New Zealand, and labour, I guess, is another issue.
Most of your machinery is imported from over here, I think, isn't it?
Yes, most of our machinery comes out of either the UK or Europe, I would say. We have similar brands on our drills and machinery to what you have here, so quite a bit of it probably out of Europe, in fact.
Yeah. Huh.
So let's just move on and talk a little bit more about yield, because yield and profitability generally go hand in hand. And you've got a graph in front of you showing the wheat yield going from over a period from 1999 through to about 2009-10. And I could put up a similar type graph for ryegrass seed yields or for barley yields. And if we look at the increase in dollars per hectare per year, it looks quite nice, or pounds, it should say, 44 pounds per hectare per year. But the problem with this graph is that it's very skewed, or it's a curved graph, and a straight line doesn't fit. So we had a huge increase in yield from 1999 through to about 2002. And then it's plateaued around that 9.6 tonnes per hectare, which is the same yield that we had as our average yield last year. And the real challenge for us, and I think possibly for you, is where is that next productivity gain going to come from? How are we going to get from 9.5 tonnes now, 9.6 tonnes now, to add another 2 tonnes to it?
The increase in yield was quite marked from 2000 up until 2004, wasn't it? It was quite a quick move, and that was just down to varieties.
Yes, it was. Well, it was partly down to varieties. I'd like to say it was down to FAR being formed in 1995, but I don't think I can quite hang my hat on that one.
It goes without saying, I think.
Yeah. So, but it's down to varieties. It's down to a significant movement from spring sown cereals to autumn sown cereals, and then the latter part is down to improved management, use of fungicides, earlier sowing, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Nick, is water becoming a limited resource as glaciers melt and recede?
Water's not a limited resource at the moment in New Zealand. We have plenty of water. It's not always in the right place at the right time. And there's a lot of reservoirs being put in for storage. There's a number of schemes being developed to irrigate, particularly the Canterbury Plains, but there is increasing resistance around that. The great thing about the irrigation schemes is that they will always have to meet minimum stream flows. So in a drought period before the irrigation schemes, the streams might run dry, but with the irrigation schemes, they're augmenting the water flow into the streams as well. So it's a win-win, really, but we're still having some battles around that.
I was looking on Google, and down around Christchurch there's huge irrigation used, isn't there, on the paddocks, as they say. I'll call it paddocks, not fields. And there was some issue, I thought, with the river through Christchurch at one time. Is that still a pain?
Yes, there's plenty of irrigation around Christchurch, and there is a river near Christchurch, the Selwyn River, which some people would like to associate the degradation in that stream with increased drawdown for irrigation. The reality is that stream runs dry when there's a drought,
Right.
and so when there's a drought, there's no water running through it, and so
Right.
of course the water quality declines. The river actually in Christchurch, the Avon River, that's totally a urban river, and so any of the issues in that are urban placed, and I think there may be some problems with water quality there at times as well.
So it's not all the farmers' fault then, thank goodness.
No, I don't think it is always all the farmers' fault.
I've got some questions coming in here for you, Nick. First of all, what factors influence land value? Is it city money wanting to buy hobby farms, or does taxation such as death duties influence the price?
I think the major driver of price on land has been what the land's going to be used for, and so people competing to get that land for, and particularly in dairying in the last few years. The movement of barley to bungalows hasn't been great, so we're not seeing large areas of arable land particularly going into bungalows. It is an issue, and particularly around Auckland, we're seeing land around the edge of the city going into housing, which is not necessarily great, and it tends to be high quality land, of course.
If a farm changes hands through a generation, do you have what we have in the UK with inheritance tax relief?
No,
No,
we don't.
no. So someone gets taxed on it, and that's that. Crikey.
Another question here for you, Nick. The graph with the wheat yield gain. Somebody's asking, does the plateau effect of the graph correlate to an uptake of reduced tillage systems in New Zealand, in your opinion?
No, it doesn't. I mean, there's been an increase in reduced tillage and no tillage. The plateau doesn't relate to that. In all the research trials that have been done, and some of them are large-scale trials, or there's one in particular that's a large-scale trial using farm machinery, the yields of the no-tills or the minimum tills are exactly the same, sometimes better than the full cultivation.
Right, okay, final one, and I've got quite a few questions coming in here. I'm going to try and combine two here. How much of the yield increase can you attribute to improved disease control? And are there issues around disease resistance and the availability of fungicides in New Zealand?
Yeah, so certainly in those earlier years, or up until 2002, a large chunk in the probably the period 99, 2002 was due to improved disease control, and we moved quite markedly from limited use of fungicides to following a UK type program with 3 sprays. And at the moment, that's probably the standard sort of practice, but we're going through similar issues to what's happening here. We've got resistance to the strobilurins with Septoria tritici blotch. We've got resistance to the strobilurins and the SDHIs with Ramularia, and we've got reduced sensitivity of both of those to the triazole fungicides. We don't have chlorothalonol, so our multi-site options are pretty limited.
Great, thank you, Nick. There's a couple of other outstanding questions, but I think they tie, having seen your presentation, they tie in later, so I'll ask them when they're relevant.
You've done pretty well on your yields over there, because you were at one time holding the record for the wheat yields. I think it's held at the moment by the UK, thank goodness. It's not just the rugby we're okay at. But you've done pretty well over time, haven't you, with that?
Yeah, yes, we have done well with our yields, and yeah, we have held the world record for wheat and barley at times, and I guess that reflects the climate that we have and the soils, and we've got some very good farmers.
Yeah.
So we're looking at a table here, which is a little bit different way of looking at it. And we're just talking about yield, and yield being king. Now, while it is king, and in the New Zealand scenario where we are able to grow things most days of the year, we've also got to think about how much money we're making per hectare per day. And in the livestock industry in New Zealand, live weight gain per animal per day is what really drives their productivity or their profitability. So what you have in front of us is a in front of you is a table which has the gross margin per hectare per day in the bottom row. And I'm actually going to focus you just on two columns there. The first one being barley grain sown 1 September, which, remember, 1 September in New Zealand is a spring sown crop, and the barley silage sown 1 September. And you can see that the second row up from the bottom, the gross margin per hectare, is exactly the same for both of those crops. But when we look at the gross margin per hectare per day, it's £2 better for the barley silage than the barley grain. And the beauty of doing that is that then we can start to look at what crop could follow that. So we could then move through to the last column and potentially get a late crop of processed peas in, which might have a gross margin of £9 per hectare per day. And collectively, the gross margin for those two crops per hectare per day could be a lot greater for the year than the barley grain, followed by maybe going back to grass or something like that. So while yield is really important, yield's only one component of the profitability.
Goes back to the mixed farming argument again, doesn't it? If you've got somewhere for the silage to go, then you can utilise a second catch crop in there, then it's all good, really.
Yes, it does. And I think there's some other pluses of silage and how we manage our grass weeds, because we can take the silage off before the grass weeds have seeded and deliver them along with the silage to someone else. So in some cases, it's being used to try and manage grass weeds as well.
Yeah.
A question from Simon here. When livestock are included in the rotation, have you quantified in monetary terms the benefit to the rest of the rotation in terms of fertility and soil quality? Is that something to take into consideration, do you think, Nick?
Certainly, I mean, the livestock are improving soil quality if they're well managed, obviously. I couldn't quantify it in monetary terms without doing some background reading and looking it up. There have been numbers done around it, but I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. So if we move along, our challenge, or one of our challenges in New Zealand, is we can grow many things, but someone else controls the value chain. So we're largely commodity producers. The wheats, the barleys, the grass seeds are largely commodity producers, and somebody tells you the price. And we think that that's going to present challenges going forward, and we need to look at how we interact with people in the value chain and redesign our value chain to create what we're calling a value web, because the person we're growing the food for at the end of the day is a consumer. It's not a supermarket, it's not the flour mill, it's not the grain and seed merchant, it's a consumer. And somehow, ideally, we want the consumer, who's at the centre of this web here, to be the person who dictates what they're prepared to pay for a product and what products they want.
What do you think is the limit in New Zealand on domestic produce? When you're selling to consumers, how many consumers can you sell to?
So at the moment, for our milling wheat, for example, we supply enough milling wheat for about a quarter of the New Zealand consumption. Now, I guess the question is, do we want to supply for all of the New Zealand consumption? Because that would mean supplying lower quality, potentially lower value wheat for what I'd call the plastic wrap white loaf in the supermarket. Or should we be targeting the higher end grains where a difference of, say, 2 cents a loaf in our language would equate to $50 extra to the farmer, so £25 roughly to the farmer. And that's what I think we should be targeting, where there is a discerning consumer who's quite happy or wouldn't even notice, and most consumers probably wouldn't notice a 2 cent difference in bread price in the supermarket.
No. Do you think the mills would play ball with that, bearing in mind they'd have to change their system for marginal amounts?
Well, we're working with a mill on this sort of philosophy at the moment, and we're making good progress, and we're hopeful that we will make some progress. If we don't, then it's going to be very hard to increase the supply of New Zealand wheat into the New Zealand market. We have another constraint, is that we have a little bit of water between the South Island, where most of the wheat is grown, and the North Island, which is where most of the people live. And getting things across that piece of water is expensive, but it's not unsurmountable. It's how do you provide the whole package to the party that is buying the product.
And do you think that New Zealand consumer is looking for an added value bread for a focaccia or something more exotic than your white loaf?
Certainly, there are consumers who care.
Yeah.
Now, the percentage of the population is difficult to determine, but there are consumers who care. When you ask them, will they pay more, then a lot of people will say yes. But when you actually watch the shopping habits, that's probably a bit different as well.
From a UK point of view, I suppose we've got the benefit of more people, so the proportion will be there's more of them willing to buy that stuff. So,
yeah, I think that's right, and I think that's a challenge. Is how do we get so that consumers are thinking about the products that are produced on farm as being food and food they consume, and then they're prepared to take on board the provenance or the quality issues or the supply chain issues or the traceability issues that you can supply because you grow the product here in the UK or in New Zealand in our case.
It might go against the grain of Brexit if we're selling French baguettes made in Basildon or something, wouldn't it?
Nick, how do the farming community engage or collaborate with the consumers, and how much do the New Zealand public know about farming, in your opinion?
So at the moment there is some engagement with the consumers, but New Zealand is becoming more urban and has markedly changed in how urban it is over the last 10, 20, 30 years, I guess. So there's less and less connection between farming and the urban community. And that is a problem, and so there's less understanding about where food comes from, and I guess that's something that we as farming communities in New Zealand are going to have to work hard to do, is to try and ensure that awareness is there. The opportunities for people to get out on farm is less than what it used to be. I mean, everybody that I knew when I was growing up had contact with somebody on a farm. Now that's probably, well, I know that's not the case anymore, and those linkages are getting weaker.
Are there lots of independent food producers in New Zealand selling sort of local produce, local crisps, local bread, local this, local that, or is it mainly supermarket led at the moment?
It's mainly supermarket led at the moment. There are some changes starting to happen, and so we see an example in crisps, for example, of a company called Heartland, which has come on stream recently, a farming family that recognised that to market their potatoes and to get real value for their potatoes, they had to take greater ownership of the value chain, so they've gone into processing.
Yeah.
Do you have quality assurance schemes over there that they give consumers confidence, or?
Yeah. Yes, in our wheat production we have wheat quality assurance program, and that it's to supply to the mills. You have to be a member of that program.
Do you think it adds value or just puts a base in the market?
At the moment, I think it just puts a base in the market. But again, that's one of the things that we would like to see turn around and say, what is the value of the quality assurance program? And that may mean that there's other indicators that are associated with the product that are giving the consumer confidence, and are things that the farmers can readily meet, but attributable back to their farm.
Over here, we've got a thing called the red tractor. Have you got anything like that over with you? It's like a stamp on your food? No,
we haven't got anything that labels it as New Zealand food, and that's one of the things we're working on, and I'm working on with a group of other people, is can we get a New Zealand grain mark, which gives the consumer confidence that this is something that's New Zealand.
Yeah. Huh.
So if we just carry on talking about the value of food and how can we add value to crops, and it's how can we do things that are going to ensure that the value of what you grow or what we grow is greater than what it is now. And most of what we grow on our cropping farms, nearly all of it in fact, is further processed, so we're in the ingredients game. And interestingly, when I was walking through the London Underground the other day, I saw the poster or the picture that's on the right of your screen of Oatly milk, which Oatly's a Swedish company, and it's like milk but made for humans, and obviously it's made from oats. And there's a huge increase in the consumption of plant-based beverages throughout the world. And in the US, the consumption of dairy is decreasing and the consumption of plant-based beverages is increasing. So what are the future for some of these things are the challenges we have to look at and try and understand and make sure that we're growing things that people want to consume. So there's a number of points there. Exportable water is something we in New Zealand say we've got plenty of water. Why are we not exporting the water and the products we grow, so probably fresh vegetables or something like that, to countries that are water scarce? And there's a range of other things that we could be looking at. One of the things that's happening in the world is a huge trend towards plant proteins. We're cautious of plant proteins because it potentially just puts us back into a commodity market.
We're so lucky in the UK. You've already mentioned that we've got you've got no AD plants over there, which AD plants to us over here are adding value in all sorts of ways. It's a love-hate relationship. If you've got one, you love it. If you haven't, you hate it. But it's adding value to many crops with maize, beet, rye, and we're producing electricity, which is again adding value off the farm, isn't it? So, so in some respects, the UK is in a lucky position.
Yeah, I think from that respect you are, and it's how can you add value? You know, do you need to add value through further processing the product, or do you add value through putting it through an animal, or do you add value through putting it through a AD plant? And it's going to be horses for courses, and not everybody's going to look at their farming business and say they want to add value, or not everybody can. So commodities are always going to be important no matter where we are in this farming game. I think it's just, can we look at what we do in our business and say, I'm going to do 10% of it that's got added value, or 20%, or whatever that's going to increase the profitability of my business.
Talking of adding value, is any sort of solar power being used and wind power in New Zealand? Is that I hate to use the word subsidized, but it's the way that it seems to have been taken up over here.
So there is solar power, generally just small scale production on people's roofs for their own use. There is some wind power, but that's all owned by the mainstream energy companies, and they own the towers and they've leased the land to put them on, or they own the land. Yeah. And they tend to be big farms. So individual farmers putting up windmills is not.
It's just not going to happen.
It doesn't seem to be happening, no.
No. So we're the same, but we're different, aren't we?
Yeah. So we can add value in other ways as well, and potentially we could add value by simply doing a better job of producing products that we already grow. And this graph here on this page shows the increase in seed yield of ryegrass when we add Modus or Trinaxipathe ethyl, a plant growth regulator, sprayed onto the crop. And this is something that's taken off very quickly because it's easy to do. And so when we're looking at adding value through increasing productivity, we need to think about how easy it is to implement, how reliable it is to implement, and how immediate it is to implement. And so something like this, where we were able to spray it on just prior to during stem elongation type stage, and you see the effect in the seed yield immediately, or just a month or so later, is something that's very easy for people to implement, and the costs of implementing it are small as well. So something like this, we had really rapid uptake. The margin over chemical cost was around £550 per hectare, and so farmers took it up very, very quickly.
And that's just something that you've done through FAR that's adding value through the side door, really, isn't it?
Yes, I'd like to again say that we could take credit for it, but I think a certain chemical company was involved in developing the product as well.
We'll find something in a minute.
So New Zealand's no different to the UK in many respects. We have regulation coming at us. We have a number of issues that are going to impact on farmers, and farmers are making changes to farm and to meet these regulations, and also to try and anticipate what's like coming at them, and so they're making changes in some cases in advance of what the regulations or changes are likely to be. And water is one of the ones which is a real hot topic at the moment, if you want to call it a hot topic. Mostly around quality, not around quantity. We generally have plenty of water. It might not be in the right place at the right time, but we do have water. But there is real concern about nitrate leaching and nitrates getting into our groundwater. And certainly there is a lot of research going on and a lot of planning going on around trying to ensure that we are minimising our leaching of nitrates into the waterways.
It's very similar to over here, really. We're in many respects, we seem to be a little way forward on our management of water with the buffer strips and things and environmental schemes that we're being asked to put in and paid for.
Yes, I think you are certainly with your buffer strips ahead of us. We have a number of buffer strips going in, and particularly in dairy farms, that we have to exclude animals from waterways.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's certainly the increasing amount of protection.
And you're having regulation. I don't want to bang on about this, but you're having regulation without any repayment, really. Whereas
that's correct.
We're being looked after a little bit.
Yeah,
we're having our hands held in some respect.
Ability to get grants for doing that sort of thing. You might get a grant for a little bit of reforestation, but it's around a specific area that's got recognised attributes that they want to protect.
Is cereals, irrigating your cereals in New Zealand common practice, and if so, what kind of percentage would you say farmers would be irrigating?
So irrigation of cereals is common practice, probably about 70% of the,
right,
maybe slightly less than that, but 60-70% would be irrigated. So again, we're no different from you. Agrochemicals, we have issues around registration, resistance, and increasingly around safety. And we have certainly considering soil quality and thinking about how we ensure we have high quality soils going forward. One of the changes in the dairy industry is it hasn't changed as such, but there's a lot of discussion of have we reached the peak number of cows that we can farm for dairying in New Zealand.
Have you noticed a degradation in your soil quality since the change, or have farmers farmed better and kept the soil in good order?
I think generally farmers are farming well and trying to ensure that their soil qualities are retained. There's certainly a lot more awareness now of soil quality, and farmers are trying to manage their soil quality to reduce degradation. We are in a similar place to you, I think, in that we're still developing the best indicators or to follow the trends and changes in soil quality. And we don't have as much history as you, obviously, so we've got a relatively short time frame that we're measuring those changes today.
Okay.
So the public are also concerned about what we're doing in farming. Again, similar to what we have here, and what you have on the screen in front of you is a range or a number of headlines from the mainstream media that I clipped in the period between August 2016 and just before coming over here a couple of weeks ago in relation to glyphosate. Most of them are clipped between August 2018 and when I came over here. So there's a lot of discussion now about glyphosate and whether glyphosate should be used in the way that's currently being used in New Zealand. All of those headlines that you see in front of you are talking about negatives around glyphosate. Not one of them is from a farming perspective, outlining the potential benefits from a soil conservation perspective, or from the value of food perspective, or from the downsides of using the alternatives to glyphosate, which are a lot more toxic chemicals. So we need to, in New Zealand, get better at trying to deliver our side of the story and make sure that we have good facts in front of people.
Same over here, and it's the same story worldwide by the sound of it.
I think it is, and I think that's one of our real challenges, is trying to make sure that the next big topic, whether it's soils, whether it's climate change, whether it's greenhouse gas emissions, we have the right information so that when the topic is put out in front of the public, when it does become an issue, that we're able to respond really quickly with good information.
Do you have a strong farming lobby in the communities in New Zealand?
We have Federated Farmers, which is similar to the NFU here, and they are involved in policy work and lobbying. We also have Dairy NZ and Beef and Lamb that are involved in some of that work as well.
Yeah, so there is something being done to promote agriculture.
Yes, there is, and they probably have good contact with government and are in touch with what's going on in government, and are regularly talking with our minister as well. So the last little bit of what we're going to cover here tonight is what we're calling the New Zealand story around subsidies. And this slide portrays the timeframes as when subsidies came into New Zealand agriculture and when we exited from subsidies. So in 1973, you joined the EU. Now, we knew that you were going to join the EU, or that you'd been negotiating to join the EU for a number of years before that happened, just the same as you've known that you've been negotiating around Brexit for quite some time.
Brexit?
Brexit.
Did you mention Brexit?
Yeah, am I allowed to say that word?
I don't know. It just spoilt my evening anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll carry on and we won't mention it again.
No.
So, in planning, we should have been more prepared. We knew it was going to happen, and however, but by 1974, there was some problems starting to arise, and so we had input subsidies. So fertiliser was subsidised and was widely subsidised and widely used. There were also interest-free loans to clear land, came in 1974. By 1975, and remember we're largely pastoral-based industry at that stage, there was a stock subsidy, so that for every animal you had on the farm on a particular date, I think it was the 1st of June, you received a payment. And you received a supplementary minimum price for any animals going to slaughter. So that by 1980, 30% of the total farm income was from subsidies. And in 84 is when the subsidies started to be removed, and our farmers cried that they'd never be able to operate effectively and never be sustainable financially going forward. To add to that, for the arable farmers, in 1987, the deregulation of the wheat board occurred. And that, again, we knew that was coming. It had been talked about well and truly in advance. But we weren't as prepared as we could have been. We hadn't gone out and looked for the right varieties to supply the New Zealand industry with milling wheats. And so what happened was that the mills went elsewhere and started to buy their wheat from overseas.
Yeah.
So that took us, that's taken us, well, we still haven't recovered from that one entirely, I guess.
Really?
So by 91, there was no income from subsidies.
It's a funny old thing, isn't it? Because as I remember it, in all my lifetime, and I'm not that old, but there's been subsidy throughout my life and before it. I mean, as far as I understand, the subsidies were around since the war. You know, the war ag used to come and persuade you to plough something up to produce, and produce was the way forward. So there are a lot of people that are farming older than me that have never lived with no subsidy at all, which is it's frightening, really, isn't it?
It is a bit concerning, isn't it? And I mean, it's really, the money's got to go round, and people either need to pay more for food and less in taxes, and that's the way it should be.
Yeah, well, they don't spend much out of their weekly wage on food at the moment over here, that's for certain.
No, and they don't in New Zealand either.
No.
And the percentage of money spent on food is declining of the salary income.
Of the salary, yeah.
So there were a number of unintended consequences of subsidies, and the first of these, reducing our biodiversity. So we went in and we cleared land, and so particularly native land, and so that reduced the range of the biodiversity we had there.
Yeah.
And then that also increased erosion, because the subsidy encouraged people to clear land that was some of the steeper land, and so it started to move down towards the oceans, which helped the flatland farmers, but not necessarily the hill country farmers. And it also encouraged increased stock numbers, because you're getting a payment for the animals, and also broken in more land. It had new pastures, so it was high producing for a couple of years, and so stock numbers increased, which meant that we weren't really focused long term on sustainability.
No.
And at the end point, well, at some point, a number of farmers exited. And that's probably around about 5% of the farmers exited as a result of removal of subsidies.
Do they really? And how many of those would have given up anyway? Is there a natural wastage during that time?
Well, I mean, if you look at farmers exiting post removal of subsidies, then yeah, farmers are exiting for a range of reasons. So how many of those would have exited anyway? Probably all of them.
Yeah.
Whether they'd have exited in that time frame is
another
the question.
Thing. Yeah.
So they might have stayed farming for a bit longer, but I would guess they would all have exited at some point.
Yeah. The writing was on the wall. So from that point of view, maybe our government at the moment is ahead of the game. Do you see that as that they've looked at what you've done and the mistakes that are made in New Zealand, and they're trying to lead us down a path of environmentally awareness before the time comes that we get our throats cut?
Well, hopefully they are. I mean, certainly the environmental awareness and making sure you've got those things in place before any other changes is a real plus, because otherwise there's potentially going to have environmental problems, aren't you? Because people are going to try and squeeze everything out of every bit of land they possibly can to maximise their income. So whether they've learnt that from our experiences or whether they've got some really good policy people, probably they've got some really good policy people.
So when you come over here, do you see us all as fat subsidy junkies, or do you see us as nice folk from England?
Well, I've got to say, nice folk from England, being surrounded by them, actually having been born here.
Oh yeah.
But I mean, I think the farming practices are very similar. I mean, the difference in how your revenue stream comes in is what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And so the total revenue coming in may not be dissimilar. It's just how it's comprised is a different thing.
Yeah. So we're going back to it. We're fairly lucky, really, with the grants that we've got available. I know that Richard's mum is very involved in grant applications in Herefordshire, for one thing, and we're sort of able to look for muck stores and concreting and drains and all sorts of things. So something the New Zealand farmers don't get.
Yes, I mean, I think that's certainly something we don't get. We can get grants for farmer groups for R&D, for research. So that would be a farmer group coming together and applying for funding for research.
Yeah.
But as far as I can think of, that's the only one I can think of. There may be others. We can also get grants for improvement of wetlands and those sorts of things. So they're environmental grants.
So it's not a list written up your arm. It's just a couple you can keep on a couple of fingers.
One
really.
here and there. Yeah.
Nick, how did the withdrawal of subsidies affect the land and machinery market?
So the land market probably it slowed down land sales markedly for some time, and then when subsidies came on, land sales increased, and then after post subsidies they declined for a while, and then they picked up again. Certainly post subsidies there was a lot of aging machinery around for a while, and although because you've got to remember that not a lot of our farmers are cropping farmers, so the amount of machinery on farms is not as great. But that's probably reversed now, and we've got mostly pretty good machinery on farms.
Was there a revaluation in land after subsidies came away?
I think there was, but I'm not that sure of how much it moved. I know that land prices were moving a lot up and down around that time.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think one of the other things that the subsidies did was they stifled innovation during that period that we went through them, and so farmers weren't out there looking as seriously for the next opportunity. Yeah.
Nick, I have a question from Damien. How important is the New Zealand brand for the marketability of the products coming out of it? Is it that, or is it the quantity and economies of scales that are your biggest driver over there?
I think it's both. Certainly for some of our brands, the brand is really important, and some of our dairy brands, it's really important, particularly some of the infant formulas into China. Some of our lamb products, the brand is really important, and that to a number of nations in the case of lamb. Some of it is trading volume as well.
And more emotionally or kind of about the culture of farming, there's a question here about we hear a lot about the suicide rates among New Zealand farmers after the removal of subsidy. Have you got any comments on that? Was it Were there problems there?
I think there were. I mean, I don't know the details about that, but certainly suicide rates among farmers is a real concern at any time. And you know, I mean, we have that problem ongoing, and it's trying to encourage people to talk about the issues that they're facing is something that I think is not unique to New Zealand. It's something that's common across the world.
I think it is. We're all in the same boat, aren't we?
So the big question, we weren't going to mention this word, Martin.
No, I know it's a B word again.
Yeah,
That's been there.
Yeah,
I
how did that
know.
get there? So how will Brexit impact on UK farmers? And obviously I'm not qualified to answer this question. That's up to you guys to figure out. But I mean, we can talk about it and see where we get to.
If you were a UK farmer, then would you have voted in or would you have voted out, based on what we've been talking about and what you know?
Well, I mean, sitting in New Zealand, little old New Zealand at the time you went through that, I would have voted to remain in, but you know, I'm not close to it, so I just look at it and said, okay, the opportunity to have access to the range of markets that were there within Europe should have been a good reason to have stayed in. However, there's a lot of other issues you had to consider, and yeah, people have made the decision the way they have, and the really important thing now is not why or how they made the decision, but how you're going to implement the right changes on farm to get the best out of it, I think.
From a trade point of view, how difficult do you think it is to create a trade deal, and how difficult was it for New Zealand to create trade deals when it was doing it, because they weren't in part of Europe?
Yeah, so when you went into the EU, about 80% or something like that, it might not have been quite that high, of our business was with the UK, and so that disappeared pretty much overnight, and so we had to go out and look for new trade opportunities, and we did the logical thing, I guess, and looked around the Pacific Rim, which is a heck of a lot closer, and have gradually been developing trade agreements with people in those regions, which are starting to now, I think, are starting to pay off for us.
Yeah, so going forward then, for us, we've got a Brexit and the subsidy, I keep using that word, the government help then disappearing over the next 10 years. When it happened to you overnight, how long did it take before you got back to some semblance of this isn't so bad and we can breathe again?
Yeah, okay, so they didn't disappear overnight. So from 84 they started removing them. By 91 was when the last ones disappeared, and I think that most farmers breathed a sigh of relief pretty soon after this process started. They said, well, we can get on and make the most of what we're doing. Obviously some didn't, but most of them said it's going to enable us to farm more effectively. So I would have said by the mid-90s, early 90s, most farmers were saying that we can move forward without these pretty comfortably, or maybe not pretty comfortably, they're probably never comfortable, but you know, without sweating overnight every night as to where the next dollar's going to come.
Yeah, so it wasn't the end of the world.
No, it certainly wasn't. So yeah, we definitely can't say what you should do, but there is potentially going to be something of a crisis, and this slide basically just encourages you to think about change, to say what are you going to get out of it, how are you going to move forward, make the changes, start to make the changes on farm if needed now, before whatever comes along, and it won't matter in some way which way it goes. It's thinking about those changes and trying to say how are we going to make the most of whatever the situation is, so that you're not thinking about them and struggling to come up for water, for air once the water's all around you.
Well, having spoken to you a couple of times this week, I think personally that we seem to be in quite a nice position. People do generally, they don't mind farmers that much. The UK, we've got a fair warning about what's going to happen. You've been 27 years without subsidy help, and you're still here and quite chirpy about it. And our government seem to be doing something in the interim to make it less painful. Is there something that you would think, but from looking outside, that you would like to say to our government and say, well, you're not doing well enough, or do you think they're doing too much to soften the blow?
Oh, that's a very difficult question. Not close enough to your government, and I'd probably have to charge them for the advice if I had anything useful to say to them.
Well, I know you're going home on Sunday, so you wouldn't have long to be in the country if you get into trouble.
I mean, certainly the government have got some hard calls they're going to have to make, and they're going to be ongoing for a while. And I mean, I just hope that they make the right calls and with the best information they can get, and that they're consulting really well with the farming communities in doing it, so that they understand the implications to the farming community and also to the consumers of the food that come out of the UK, because it's not just the farmers that are going to be impacted by a bad decision by government.
No.
It's the consumer at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Most of them don't realise that, of course, but they will be. And so I mean, if they're getting good advice, if they're talking to the right people, hopefully they'll make the right calls.
And if they're not making the right calls, if the spare seat on the plane next to you is taken up by a grey-haired lady in her late 50s, early 60s, just ask if her name's Theresa May, because she might be going for a holiday.
I'm sure she'll be at the pointy end of the plane.
She turns left, you think?
I think so.
Nick, are you happy we answer? Just rattled down some questions here that I've got kind of outstanding. First one's a couple of quick fire ones. Who are New Zealand's farmers' main competitors?
Well, for dairy products, increasingly China and the US. The US has become much more self-sufficient in dairy products. For meat products, Australia, Argentina, and the US, I guess. For arable, we're not. For herbage seed production, probably Denmark and Oregon. But I'd say for herbage seed, we work pretty collaboratively with those countries. That's Northern Hemisphere, Southern Hemisphere production, so it balances out a bit.
Do you see opportunity for more growth in the UK market if we're not in Europe?
I think there could be, certainly there could be more opportunity for herbage seed. I mean, if you look at what's happening with herbage seed production in the other parts of Europe, say Denmark Netherlands and some areas of France are a little bit more pressured now than what they were before. So there could be some more opportunities for the UK.
Trying to look on a bright side, does that mean they'll become cheaper, or do you think the competition will keep the price up?
I would like to think the competition is going to keep the price up. I mean, the buyers of seed, the difference in again, coming back, talking about the value of products is the difference in them paying 10 cents more a kilo for a price of seed and what they sow on the ground is nothing in their scheme of their business.
No. Nick, drawing on the kind of experiences we've had with neonics over here, kind of have the withdrawal of any plant protection products caused concern in New Zealand in the past?
At the moment, they haven't caused significant concern. We've had discussions around some of them, and we have a process where they go through reassessment generally before they're withdrawn. So diazinon is a key product for us for control of a native insect, and in the reassessment process, we had a conversation with the regulators, and because there were no other alternatives and work was going on to try and provide an alternative, they've given a time frame till 2028, I think, to allow us to find something. However, the neonics could be quite a different story, and they're up for reassessment, and what's happening elsewhere in the world, I expect that we could potentially lose those down the track. Losing glyphosate would create some real issues for us, as it's likely to elsewhere.
What kind of weed problems do you have in New Zealand?
What kind of weed?
Yeah.
We have very similar problems to what you have here, with the exception we don't have blackgrass in our cereal crops.
You've got one farm with it. Please tell me you've got one.
We have one site where it has been identified, and it's currently in a biosecurity program to eradicate it, and I'm sure it will be successful.
The resistance issues with your weeds?
Sorry?
The resistance
Yes,
issues.
there are resistance issues. We have resistance of a range of broadleaves to a range of herbicides. The major concern we have is if we get widespread resistance in our ryegrass populations.
Nick, what advice would you give to UK farmers to mitigate against the uncertainty of agriculture after Brexit? Also, how important is diversification for New Zealand farmers?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can give you advice. I think you've got to work out for yourselves what to do. But I mean, I think diversity is a way of managing uncertainty and managing risk. And one of the conversations I frequently have with our farmers is look at the best 10% of your land and say, how can you make that really make money for you? Similarly, look at the worst 10% of your land and say, should you even be farming it? And I think those are some ways that you can start to diversify, because you might find a parcel of land might not be very big, but might be able to grow something or produce something that's a lot more profitable than what you're doing now. Or it might not be land, it might be how you use your buildings or whatever.
Joe's asking, this is for your opinion, a trade deal with the United States, opportunity or threat? What do you think?
Well, we haven't got a trade deal with the United States. The United States elected not to be part of the Pacific trade deal. I'd like to think it's an opportunity. I mean, I'm not sure where the United States are heading with their current policies, but it seems like they're isolationist for themselves, and potentially down the track there may be wins for the rest of us.
Next question. What is driving land prices? Farmer driven or outside investment?
A bit of both. So outside investment, we've got some farms that are desirable from aesthetic reasons, or because people want to live there, that potentially are higher priced for that reason, and people that want to have the lifestyle, particularly on a high country station. And then the rest of it is driven by farmers wanting land, and hopefully the price reflects the fact that they're going to be profitable in what they farm on it.
So there's no tax incentive really behind your land purchase, because there's no inheritance tax relief, which is what we're lucky enough to have. So it's a basic farming or leisure pursuit.
Yeah, there's no capital
gain to have. No.
In your opinion, what research do you think could be done in New Zealand to help cereal crop production further?
Oh, that's a difficult question. I mean, I think the way we're heading is we're going to see less and less we're going to have to see less and less reliance on agri-chemicals, and so the types of research we're going to have and do and make sure we have the solutions in place as to how can we farm more effectively with less agri-chemicals, and whether that's herbicides or whether that's fungicides or whether that's insecticides. So some of that will come down to breeding, some of it will come down to how we implement practices such as integrated pest management. But I think that's going to be critical to take us forward and try and maintain our productivity and profitability at the levels we are.
Is New Zealand agriculture the best for profitability in your area, or competing with Australia, Tasmania and the Pacific Rim? Where would you come in that league table?
I think, well, farming in Australia is quite different. Generally, the cropping farming is largely large blocks of land producing relatively low yields. So we have some similarities with Tasmania. The farm size in Tasmania is a bit bigger, the productivity is a little bit lower, but generally I would think that we're doing pretty well on productivity per hectare within New Zealand. Yeah. Possibly on profitability per farm or per, the Australian situation does have some good returns to some farmers that have large blocks of land.
Yeah.
Nick, we're going to conclude the questions there because I'm conscious that we've already gone over on time. Martin, any roundup thoughts on that?
Well, my roundup thoughts are that, talking to Nick, we don't seem to be in such a bad place over here. You can get yourself down in the dumps if you want to, but we've got a lot of opportunities being given to us over the next 7, 8, 9 years in which to get yourself shipshape, and incentives to retain income through environmental schemes, whether you like them or not. They're income that you can just tap into. So from that point of view, I feel quite buoyed that we are going in the right direction to follow in your footsteps, really. I don't know what you feel about that.
Well, I think you're in a good space generally. I mean, I think you've got a great backup coming in to help to provide the answers and the solutions from the research that's going on with AHDB or through their systems and the ability to get information out. And knowledge is king, and
Yeah.
so making sure you have those avenues in place is going to be critical. And I think that you have a system here which is well positioned to make sure farmers are in a good position, having the information they need to make those hard calls if they have to make them.
And it all comes down to talking, doesn't it? If you've got a problem, go and talk about it, and if you've got a thought, go and talk about it. So keep everybody sane.
Nick, Martin, thank you very much. Judging by the amount of questions that come in tonight, it's been a very hot topic, and we've tried to answer as many of them as possible. And we'll anybody who's asked a question that we haven't answered, we'll get the answer to them afterwards. But I think we're gonna have to draw a line under it there. Thank you very much for taking the effort for coming and talking to us this evening. It's been thoroughly enjoyable. Martin, thank you for coming and giving us an English farmer's perspective and helping the discussion along. Really appreciate it. The next webinar is on the 20th of December. It's grain marketing, top tips for you to do this year when you're marketing your grain. As you receive the invite to this webinar, you will receive the invite to that one. All that leaves me to do is finally thank my speakers again. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Nick.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been all right, isn't it?
Yeah, we did all right.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, and good night. Cheers.